people that we can study, people that can be witnesses for us of what it means to follow you, and help us, Lord, to live in ways where we could be witnesses for the next generations that come after us. If you continue to let this world spin around the sun, and Lord, until the end, help us to live faithfully for you. And it's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. All right, Judges chapter 3. We're going to try to cover the first 4 Judges today, and see if we can get those done. Try to finish up the book of Judges and Ruth before the end of the month. So we're going to start with Othniel. I meant to put this on the screen. Do you mind going in the Dropbox and looking in the Bible class folder? I might come back there and do it if you can't find it. But I have a chart that I want to share with y'all to talk about some of the things we mentioned on Wednesday about the timeline of the judges and just the different areas and that, to try to help that work. It is in Bible class, and then there's a folder called Joshua, Judges, Ruth, and then it should be the newest file in there, if you can find that. I haven't used PowerPoint in my Bible classes for so many months in a row now. Nobody's expecting there to be one. That's my fault because I forgot to tell them. So, but it's good to try to wrap our brain around the timeline and the events of the judges and try to make some sense of how it all fits together. Because again, the more you know about that, the more you realize the intentionality of the author, who is putting together a story for us to try to help us have a better understanding of exactly, do what? It's a great question. Chart of Judges, something like that. I'll grab the clicker. So it's important to try to understand exactly how all of that pieces together, because it really does help us get a sense of what's going on in the Judges itself. So hopefully you can see, I know the screen type is a little long. It's why years ago I said, let's move the class to the front of the auditorium. That did not go well, by the way. So we've got the judges that are listed here, Othniel all the way down through Samson. And we mentioned a class or two ago that Eli and Samuel, also judges, are not part of the book of Judges. And I think it's because it doesn't necessarily fit the trajectory that the author of Judges is trying to put in place. But you've got Othniel who's chosen, and you've got just various ideas of the timeline, the times of peace that come after that. Generally speaking, I know Samson's a little bit of an exception there. But if you look at the kind of charted that out on a line graph, you would find that the time of peace goes downhill significantly after the judges. So essentially, what that leaves you with is an impression that each judge is less effective than the previous judge. Right? I mean, that idea of if they can only, you start with Othniel and Ehud and Deborah, and you've got long decades or multiple decades, but you get down to Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon, and they don't even make it a decade. You get this idea of their effectiveness seems to be waning, so to speak, as you go through this. And then I think the real details you're going to find are actually in the details of the actual people, even in the judges that we know very little about, okay? So we've got the story of Othniel, we've got the story of Ehud. Shamgar, we don't know much about, right? It's like 2 verses there. What do we know about Shamgar? Do what? Yeah, he uses a cattle prod or an ox goad, and he kills 600 people with it. And that's about all you know. That, and he judged for, doesn't even tell us how long he judged or how long the time of peace was or any of that. It's just, he did this amazing feat. That's what you know. And so that's impressive. I think probably all of us read those couple of verses and go, man, I wish we had more of that story. That'd be awesome. I'd love to hear more of that. When you get down to Abdon, who we also know very little about, 40 sons, 30 grandsons, and they rode on 70 donkeys. Impressive, right? Is it? Right? Or Ibzan, 30 sons and 30 daughters, but he married them all out of tribe. Impressive, right? Not really. Elon, we know nothing about. Like, we just know he was a judge for 10 years. Like, that's it. And so it's one of those, even in the judges that we don't know anything about, there seems to be a diminishing returns, and there seems to be a diminishing quality in them. Okay, typically speaking, the idea of having your sons on donkeys, anybody know why that detail is even included? What that's about? Do what? Yeah, they lived in opulence. They were rich. They enjoyed their living, right? Not like they had a family donkey that they could share. Every son and even every grandson had his own donkey, right? That's impressive when it comes to finances, or impressive when it comes to your estate. But what does that mean for the people of God? Probably not. I mean, how many of the people of God do you think had all of their sons and grandsons on their own donkeys? Probably not many. So I think probably what you have here is a statement that is emphasizing that Abdon lifted himself up above the people. And they lived above the people. And same thing with Ibzan, lived above the people. So that's a big difference than Shamgar, who is out there fighting a battle on behalf of the people. Do you see the difference there? And so that is what I think you've got going on here in some of the details of these stories. You've got this kind of diminishing concept among the judges, both in how long they were able to provide peace and the details that we have about their lives. And you're going to see this in the major judges also. I figure if we can call them major and minor prophets based on how long their story is, then we can call them major and minor judges, right, based on how long their stories are. So in the minor judges, you've got this diminishing pattern. You're going to find the same thing in the major judges, okay, the same sort of idea. Next thing here, get my clicker on and connected here. You've got just a couple of things, and again, I know this is hard to see that far back, but you've got a chronology of the judges, and just tried to, again, this is an attempt. I don't know that this is entirely accurate, but it's an attempt to try to put some things together. Here, what you've got is, Randy's got to get out of here. He's just turning around looking at the closer screen. So you've got the Othniel, Ehud, and Deborah there, and they kind of are in nice big blocks of time. But notice underneath Deborah, you've got Gideon, Abimelech, Tola, and Jair. Their timelines overlap. So what's happening with Deborah is at the same time as the events that are happening with Gideon. They're just in two different parts of Israel, and they're dealing with two different tribes, two different family groups that you've got there. Here in red, what you can't see, I think I got right here, you've got Jephthah and Ibzan and Elon and Abdon. That's overlapping with Jair and Tola. So at the same time as what you have in green, which is Samson. And so you've got a lot of different things happening. Here's what I want you to notice about the timeline, though, is in the early part, soon after the death of Joshua, when they turn away from the Lord, you've got a little conflict. By the time you get later in the timeline, what do you notice? Yeah, there needs to be judges everywhere, because everybody's walking away from the Lord. What do we read over Judges 17? I think it's verse 6. The people did what was right in their own eyes. And so that's what's going on, is the further we get away from Joshua and the elders, you find more oppression, more conflict, more need for rescue, and it's happening all over the country. Okay, does that make sense? And so it's good to kind of put that together because it helps you see, again, the diminishing morality of the people, that at first it's some people have betrayed the Lord. Now we're getting to where all of the people are betraying the Lord. And God is having to send rescuers all over the place. Dallas?
What you just described is why I think that when Samuel was judge, that he had a circuit, apparently, that he
Yep.
walked. And if he came into a village, they were asking, do you come peaceably?
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that he was showing some of the power of God
Yeah.
in punishing people and straightening things out
Yeah.
to get them back to God.
How many local family leaders do you think Samuel displaced as he tried to straighten the people out? Right? I mean, a lot of stories we don't have there, but that's how you did it. Like you would say, okay, you're not leading the people right, you're done, and we're going to hand the reins over to this guy who will lead better, and that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, I think Dallas is right. The judges would come in at that point, and here's maybe the right way to view this. In Othniel and Ehud, the judge's job was to stand against the oppressor, which was a foreigner. By the time you get to Samuel, who's the oppressor? Their own people. And so their own people are worried about the judgment of the judges, not the foreigner having to worry about the judgment of the judges. So again, it just, again, emphasizes that diminishing morality and the diminishing, just the continual unfaithfulness and how that continued to grow among the people. The map on the right side of the screen is a picture of where all of these judges were from. And I put that up because, again, we talked about on Wednesday that the judges weren't, we tend to think of the book of Judges as the judge came and rescued the whole nation. And there really isn't a whole nation per se yet. They've received the land promise that was given to Abraham back in Genesis 12, but I don't know that they've received the national promise yet. Right now, there's still family groups, there's still tribes, and God is having to send rescuers, notice, pretty much to all of the different tribes. Do you see that? And so you find God having to find rescuers everywhere because why is there a need for a rescuer? Because people everywhere are turning away from the Lord, right? And so again, just to try to help that hit home a little bit, I wanted to put these two little charts up there so that you could see the basic way that all of that is pieced together. So thank you, David, for finding that. The story of Othniel is a pretty simple story, right? And what do we know about Othniel? Caleb's nephew. He's called Caleb's son here. Where's that? Caleb's youngest brother. The Israelites cried out to the Lord, so the Lord raised up Othniel, son of Kenaz. Kenaz is Caleb's youngest brother. So Caleb is the nephew. What do we also know about Caleb? What's the other family connection? Do what? Othniel, yes. What else do we know about Othniel? What's the other family relation? He married Caleb's daughter, so he's also a son-in-law, so a nephew and son-in-law. Kind of a normal thing back in those days. But he is well connected to Caleb. Why is that significant? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Caleb was one of the older men in the whole people group. How do we know that? Well, he's old and well advanced in years. We're already told that back at the end of the story of Joshua. But here we've got, he is one of the two spies that was allowed. They came back with a favorable report regarding the faithfulness of God, and therefore all the others older men had to die off, but Caleb and Joshua were preserved in order to come into the promised land. So he is respected. He's clearly has his eyes on God and God's faithfulness. You see that in his story. So Caleb is well respected and wonderful. That's what we know about him. Even in his older age, he doesn't shrink back from challenges. He's willing to trust in God's faithfulness, and even as an older man, go up against giants in the land he was inheriting. So great faith coming from Caleb. Othniel is connected to that, and that's a good thing. That's what we want to have, is somebody who does well. What bad thing do we learn about Othniel? Trick question. Nothing. He's great. Like he's a wonderful judge. We don't have much of his story, right? I mean, it's pretty short here, chapter 3, verses 7 down through verse 11. But Israel's cried out, so the Lord raised up Othniel. The Spirit of the Lord came on him, and he judged Israel. Othniel went out to battle. He won the battle. The land had peace for 40 years. All good. Right? I mean, this is what we want out of our judges. Now, is this what we're going to get out of our judges? No. And we've already had that hinted to us earlier in what we studied on Tuesday, as it talked about this pattern of sin and oppression and rescue that God was going to bring on the people. Just Othniel happened to be the cream of the crop. He's the top of the downward spiral. So things are looking good, but they're going to start going downhill fast. Ehud is our next one. He's, again, if that timeline we looked at is correct, he is, kind of comes after the story of Othniel. The people had to rest, and then they fall back into sin, and God allows the Moabites to come against the people and oppress them. And so, verse 15, the Israelites cried out to the Lord after 18 years of oppression, and he raised up Ehud. What do we know about Ehud? Left-handed. Oh, that rascal. Right? That actually is a derogatory statement, just so you know. Not derogatory in a ugly sense, but that is not ideal. Okay, in that culture, and there's still a lot of this in that culture today, your left hand is your dirty hand. So the idea that you would do all of your tasks with your left hand was a character flaw. Okay, now again, in the Bible, I think it's the Benjamites, isn't it? That there were many left-handed, and they all were good with slingshots, and it's either Benjamin or Ephraim, I can't remember. But here what we've got is this idea that he's left-handed. There is a certain discriminatory concept that goes along with that. I was talking to a friend of mine who was in the military back in the early part, not Desert Storm, but after 9/11, and we were in battle. He said that one of the things that they had to learn is that oftentimes when American soldiers are getting shot at, it's not for any other reason than the Americans are acting in an offensive way unintentionally. For instance, if you were to touch somebody there with your left hand, that's very offensive, because your left hand is your dirty hand. It's the job, and this is the way they do it. You do your dirty task with your left hand. So things like, and I don't mean to be crass, but wiping. You do that with your left hand, because that makes your left hand unclean. And so you do your unclean task with your left hand, and you do your clean task. You would touch somebody, that sort of thing, with your right hand. That's kind of the way they separate it. So back in, he would say that you'd be riding in the Humvee, but you would be sitting where your left leg is up underneath your right leg, and you're showing your left foot out the passenger door. You'll get shot at. You hang your feet out of a helicopter, you'll get shot at. Because feet are unclean, especially left feet, right? Because the left side of your body is unclean. And so again, there's those kind of things. That is an idea that goes back centuries, including even back to this time. Okay, so the left-handed idea, that was in a sense, a derogatory statement about Ehud. Larry? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
But the oppressors, it said they oppressed Israel. Were they just oppressing?
Probably just a region, yes. So now again, they're coming. The Bible is speaking of them as a group, but the oppression is probably just in a particular region, and so. And again, that's why you can have so much overlap when you get a little bit later in the story. Keith? Okay, so that's where, again, God chooses a left-handed person because it works in God's favor, right? How does this work in Ehud's favor? How does this work in Ehud's favor? What does he do? That's right. So, he's going to go in and carry a message to the oppressing king, their King Eglon of the Moabites. And he needs to get a weapon past the guards. Okay? Well, they're going to look for a sword to be hanging on your left side, because you grab it with your right hand and go. But here, probably wearing some sort of robe, probably has the sword beneath the robe. They look on his right side, there's nothing there. They assume he's unarmed. But he's not, because he has something hidden over here on his other side that he can pull with his left hand because he is left-handed. Does that make sense? And so that's the idea. Now again, why wouldn't they check the other side? Culturally, you just didn't hang a sword over there. Everyone is right-handed, right? I mean, that's just the way that goes. And so we look at that and go, that's ridiculous. But again, how many people, who knows a left-handed person? We all do. Probably some of you rascals in here. I mean, so that makes a difference in the way that we approach security and things like that. Our expectations are going to be different. Keith?
Some of that cultural practice or understanding even is that in the United States, in other part of the country, being more things, even fully outward, there are a lot of people, up until I think pretty recently, when I think about it, who were taught to not be left-handed.
Mm-hmm. That was one of the signs that somebody was a witch. And so you would teach children, especially young ladies, to be right-handed, because in some places like Salem, that could be a sign that a young lady was a witch. So Janet just pointed at Richard that he was taught to be right-handed. Are you naturally left-handed? Not today. Yeah. I'm sure they would. They do, but again, they fight for God's purposes. They're fighting for God, so that's different. They're accomplishing righteous things by doing the fighting. And so it has more to do with you trained, your kids were trained to be right-handed because you would not want them doing anything left-handed. So of course they're going to learn to fight right-handed also. But again, it's such a minor thing for us as we think about this, because culturally we have no discrimination against left-handed people. I always thought it was funny growing up. It was a big thing in malls around America to have left-handed stores where they would sell left-handed products. Anybody remember those stores? So, and again, but now that's such a common thing. I have a friend of mine who's left-handed who plays guitar, and he was bemoaning to me a couple of months ago how expensive guitars are for him because he's left-handed. Because the majority of guitars are going to be right-handed guitars, and they're going to be one or the other because of the way guitars are made. So, but again, it's just one of those, but you can get them, right? I mean, that's where it's become culturally, socially acceptable to be left-handed, although young grade teachers hate left-handed because then you got to teach kids to write that way, and it is so much more difficult to do that. Dallas and then Randy.
Jimi Hendrix,
Mm-hmm.
famous guitarist, was left-handed.
Yep.
And if you see photographs of him on stage, he has a normal guitar.
Upside down.
Upside down.
Yep, and that actually helped define his sound because of the way the pickup is in the guitar. The pickups would be upside down, and so he would string it backwards, and it would make his guitar sound different. And so that there's a lot of people now who will actually buy, right-handed people who will buy left-handed guitars, string them backward so that they can play it like Jimi Hendrix. So, Randy?
Writing in cursive or printing is being de-emphasized.
Yeah, yeah. Everybody types now, so we're good. Typing isn't right or left-handed anymore. So, and thumbs work, just fine. So it's, but again, not to belabor the point of being left-handed, but that is a detail in the story that I think sometimes we let that pass by us because we don't have the same discrimination. But imagine that you are a Middle Eastern person and you read this for the first time with your discrimination against the uncleanliness of the left hand, and you read that somebody is left-handed, right? You have a different reaction to that. And so I just want us to recognize that. Now, that being said, was Ehud a great judge? As far as we know, yeah. He went out there, he did a hard job. He did it on his own, right? He snuck into the king's, or snuck in, he was allowed into the king's chamber to deliver his message. What was his message? Yeah, right in the gut. I mean, he stabbed big old fat Eglon right in the gut, and his stomach closed over the sword, and his guts all spilled out because, didn't even retrieve the sword because it was lost in there. I always found it interesting that where their meeting place was in the resting house of the king, which sounds like maybe that's just a relaxing parlor, but it's not. It's the bathroom. Because you read later that Ehud locks the door and sneaks out the window. And why don't anybody come in and check on the king for a while? He might be relieving himself, right? Not the normal meeting place, but that's apparently what's going on here. Maybe there's, again, I think we probably have some cultural disconnect there in that we think of rooms where you use the restroom. Did they have restrooms with plumbing back in these days? No. I mean, typically that would just be a chamber pot of some sort or something like that. And so I would imagine that's what they're assuming. Not that Ehud went to the bathroom to meet the king, it's that those kind of things would be taken care of in a normal relaxing room. But they're giving him his privacy as the king until they decide he's been in here way too long, and they burst in and find him dead. So, Dallas?
I disagree with your analysis.
Okay.
The bathroom.
Yeah.
I believe he was mistaken for having taken a nap.
Okay, maybe.
Covering of the feet. That description is also used in the case of Saul and David in the cave, that Saul was covering his feet. And everybody says, well, he was going to the bathroom when David cut his. No, he was taking a nap. And I know that because in Ruth, which is shortly upcoming, she is told to go in and uncover Boaz's feet. He was covering his feet. He was taking a nap. She was told to go in and join him.
Yeah, maybe so. Most of what I have read has leaned on the relieving himself concept, but maybe it's some sort of idiom to mean something. And so maybe it is just a nap. In the case of Ruth and Boaz, that's overnight. So I don't know that it would be a nap. Maybe it was, like they're working through the night and he's resting for a little bit. Yeah, so, but it is, again, it's an interesting story here with Ehud and Eglon, where he's allowed in, he's able to sneak a sword in because of his unique characteristic that he's left-handed, and he is able to rescue the people because of that. When he escapes, he grabs all the people, tells them, follow me, and they struck down about 10,000 Moabites. You read this at the end of chapter 3. All stout and able-bodied men, none of them are able to escape, and Moab becomes subject to Israel that day. The land had peace for 80 years. My guess is when it says land has peace for 80 years, that's not saying there was no conflict. That's saying they had peace from the Moabites for 80 years. But again, that's up for your interpretation. Randy?
Ehud escaped, he says, and he passed by the idols.
Yep.
First time I noticed that.
Yeah. He passed the Jordan near the carved images and reached Sirah. Yeah, and whose carved images are those? If he's passing the Jordan, be Israelite. And so, again, there is definitely difficulties in getting these people to get rid of their idols. And you see that in little details as you go through the Judges, Ruth, even all the way up into the Kings. So then we come to Shamgar, who, again, just awesome, untold story here of how a man can take a cattle prod or an ox goad. What's an ox goad? Yeah, sharp stick, right? A long, sharp stick. Every little boy's favorite toy. He takes that and he kills 600 people with it, and it is an impressive feat. I find it interesting in all of these stories, back in Othniel, if you look back there, it says, Othniel went out to battle, and the Lord handed the king of Aram to him. Who did the battle? Othniel. You get to Ehud, who does the battle? The predominant part of the battle? Ehud. When you get to Shamgar, who does the battle? Shamgar. So these aren't necessarily, now Ehud does lead the people in the battle, and maybe there's an unspoken thing with Othniel and Shamgar also, but it seems that the weight of the victory is handed to the individual, right? And I think that's important for us to notice on the first 3 judges that is true. That the weight of the victory is handed to the one individual who was chosen by God to do a good work. Because that's about to shift. And so, again, you see all these different patterns as you go through the book of Judges. That's what I want you to pay attention to as we go through. Now, Deborah's story is known to most of us probably pretty well, right? Someone briefly tell us the story of Deborah. Barak. Yep. Yep.
He refuses unless she goes with him. She would go with the victory not his.
Mm-hmm.
Even though he led the way, he would not get the victory.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Who gets it?
A woman.
A woman. Very good. And that's what's predicted. Okay, Larry?
Really no taking out, take woman lead. Women, non-leaders.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
There's no big deal made about her being the leader.
Well, you say that, but there is in the prophecy that she gives that the victory will be handed to a woman. Like, you think about how featured women are in these 2 chapters. They are incredible. So we've got, just to kind of add it up for you, we got a woman introduced who's a judge. We've got a man who is too wimpy or cowardly to go do the battle, and a woman has to set him straight. Then she says that there will be victory, but the victory will be handed to a woman. And then we go to it, what you find out is it's not just a woman, but it is a foreign woman living in the land. And so that becomes a big deal. And then when you get to the very end of the story, you get to the end of Deborah's song. Who's featured? Women. Okay, Sisera's mom and the other women that were around her, they're featured at the end of the story. So the story is bookended by women, it is featuring women, and it is making the woman the victor, the one who did the hardest task, right? So it without saying, look out guys, here comes some women, it's pretty much saying that. Like it is so inundated with the presence of women, especially in a culture, in a time, and in a text that didn't do that. So that, again, I think that most definitely would have stood out, and it's worth making a big deal about whenever you read the story. Keith?
So the interesting thing about Deborah, one of the interesting things about Deborah to me is that, unless I missed it earlier, this feels like one of the first times we see a judge doing the job that we think of when we think of the word judge.
Yes.
The first three judges are very much militaristic, almost warlords.
Yeah.
Whereas Deborah, we see her settling disputes and establish, like, to become a judge here. By the time we enter into maybe arrest, or she's already on the palm tree, settling disputes for the people, and people knew who she was, and she's kind of sending Barak out. But it's just a difference in the way we kind of are being perfectly.
Yeah. No, you're 100% right. So I've always thought the term judges is a very odd term for this book because of them, how many of them sit under a tree and actually settle disputes? Just this one. Just Deborah, as far as I'm aware. Now, it will say Othniel judged Israel for 40 years, and that Ehud judged Israel for so many years. But it never defines what judging Israel is. This is the first place where we get, like you said, a sense of what that job was over the course of decades. Not the one military battle they fought to push back their oppressor, but the actual judging the disputes and being the person of counsel and the person who would represent the will of God to the people. And so, yes, I find that interesting. And again, the fact that they are coming to a woman for the judgment of their disputes, for us in modern days, we don't see that being such a conflicting idea. But for them, would they have seen this and going, what in the, like, where's the man? Like, for them and their culture, that would have been a big deal. And I don't want us to lose sight of that. As we've gone through, Othniel, great example. Ehud, left-handed. Okay, you get over to Shamgar, we don't really know anything. Deborah, a woman? Like, you're starting to see that things are getting less ideal as we go down through the list. Okay, that being said, Deborah, incredible woman, incredible spokesperson for God. She does a wonderful job, and this story really does emphasize women. You see that as you go through the story. So she essentially says she's the prophetess and the wife. She's judging Israel. She summons Barak, and this is verse 6. Hasn't the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you, go deploy the troops on Mount Tabor and take with you 10,000 men from the Naphtalites and the Zebulunites? So, haven't you've already received instructions? Like, is there a reason you're not doing this? Here's what I find interesting about this. Earlier, it says she's judging. Verse 5, she would sit and the Israelites would come to her. It's interesting in this case, she's summoning one of the Israelites to come to her because she's got to set something straight. Okay? Again, that's kind of a little upside down twist here. She summons Barak. She says, "You've been given a job. Why aren't you doing it?" What's his response? Yeah, I'll go, but not if if you will not go, I will not go. My assumption, and y'all know me, I try to always reveal when I'm just making assumptions when I realize I'm making them. But my assumption here is that he sees her kind of like later on they see the ark. If I take this representative of God with me, then God will bless me. If I don't, there's no telling what God's going to do. Right? And that she needs to be there in order for them to win. She says, "Fine, I'll go, but you will not receive the victory. The victory will be given to a woman." They do go. You find out later on in the song itself, it says, verse 15, "The Lord threw Sisera and all of his charioteers and all the army into a panic." You find in the song that is revealed that it was done by an overflowing of the river. They more than likely, they got all these iron chariots. Those are heavy. They're not going to move across rocky terrain of Israel very well, but they will move through a dry riverbed, right? Dry river. Right now, our little creek behind our house is empty of water. Might have a little bit in it now after the last couple of days. It's been dry for about 2 months, and it's hard as a rock, right? It'd be easy to, you got a nice wide river. What's the bottom of that river look like? It's like a road, right? It's easy to get your charioteers down the road. But it seems like that's probably what they were doing. And then it says that the verse 21 of chapter 5, "The river Kishon swept them away," the ancient river, the river Kishon. So more than likely what happened is they're traveling along the road of the river, the dried up river, and God brings disaster on them. God brings rain, and that causes that to happen. But Sisera flees because he realizes. Oh, Lisa, go ahead. Yeah. 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 Yeah, I would imagine so. And again, you also got to think, it's not until you get to Samuel that you really have whole nation judges. She's probably a judge for her tribe or the people around them. And maybe there are more judges in other places that just aren't mentioned in the story. I tend to think that's probably the case. But here she is, she goes, or excuse me, Sisera flees. Sisera goes to the house of Jael. Jael is mentioned as being the wife of Heber, the Kenite. The Kenites were foreigners that were nomadic. They would travel around, and so apparently here we've got a family. The Kenites were also known to be friendly with the Aram people. And so more than likely that's what's going on there. So he thinks he's got respite here in her tent, but she shows her loyalty to the Israelites, and she kills him. She helps him fall asleep with some more milk, and as he's dozing, she takes a tent peg and drives it down through his side of his head, more than likely into the ground. It is a vicious and horrible sounding story that I'm glad they have not made into a movie that I've seen, and they essentially they find him there. He is dead, and she has done the task. So it is a good ending to a kind of sad beginning of a story where God's man at this time is not willing, the leader of the army is not willing to do what he's supposed to do. Go ahead. Oh, yeah. Yep. Yep, and I've always found that to be an interest. There are a lot of similarities. If you ever want to compare the Song of Mary to the Song of Deborah, a lot of similarities between the two songs. It's just kind of interesting to see that. But yes, you do have a very direct, most blessed among women statement for Mary, mother of Jesus, and Jael, a foreign woman who wasn't even an Israelite. And how many times are those connections made in the early parts of the Gospels? That's another one of those places. Here, the song, a couple of interesting things about the song, just as we wrap up. One is, I find we always call it Deborah's song, but really, who's responsible for the song? Who's singing it? Chapter 5, verse 1, on that day, Deborah and Barak. We always look at Barak as being the loser of the story, right? Big L on your forehead kind of approach to Barak. But it's he is exalted even in the song. He is one of the singers of the song. That victory belongs to him, according to the song. Verse 12, awake, awake, Deborah, awake, awake, sing a song. Awake, Barak, and take your prisoners, son of Ahinoam. You've got all of these, he's kind of included with Deborah for the victory. So the Bible at least does give him credit for the fact that he was willing to step up and do what was right. And he is also listed there in Hebrews chapter 11, right? What more shall I say but of Barak? It mentions him specifically as being a person of faith. We look at him in this story and go, no, he's not. But he is. He just needed to know that God would be with him. And that's the role that Deborah played. But once he knew that God was with him, yes, he led the people in battle. And so that is something to note there from the story. Last thing to note, just in the minute we have left, the end of the song is just awful. And I don't mean like poorly written, but the approach, the content there. Sisera's mother looked through the window. She peered through the lattice, crying out, "Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why don't I hear the hoofbeats of his horses?" Her wisest princesses answer her. She even answers herself. Are they not finding and dividing the spoil? What spoil? The women, right? So are they not dividing a girl or two for each warrior, the spoil of colored garments for Sisera, the spoil of an embroidered garment or two for my neck? And so, again, the story begins and ends with women, but it begins with a woman of great prominence, wisdom, and honor. And what does it end with? A despicable woman who is rejoicing over the fact that her husband can be raping women as part of the spoils of his war. Right? So even in that, you see this diminishing morality. Deborah is presented as a wonderful example, but his mother, the woman the story ends with, is despicable. And of course disappointed because Sisera is now dead. Lord, may all your enemies perish as Sisera did.